Hey, cohort 16. This is Tim with Kibby and Krista. We are doing our book talk for a book, The Other Westmore. We did two in-person sessions, which were really outstanding experiences, pretty profound. We had some engaging dialogue about the book. And so we wanted to mirror that in this book talk via Google Chat. The Other Westmore, just a section from the beginning of the book, tells a little bit about what the book is about. But an excerpt from the intro. This is the story of two boys living in Baltimore with similar histories and an identical name, Westmore. One of us is free and has experienced things that he never even knew to dream about as a kid. The other will spend every day until his death behind bars for an armed robbery that left a police officer and father of five dead. The chilling truth is that his story could have been mine. The tragedy is that my story could have been his. Our stories are obviously specific to our two lives, but I hope they will illuminate the crucial inflection points in every life, the sudden moments of decision where our paths diverge and our fates are sealed. It's unsettling to know how little separates each of us from another life altogether. So that was a profound quote. Throughout the book, we thought it was very, very critical, the relationship that the author Westmore and the other Westmore, who is in prison for life, had with their fathers. Neither child or neither person had their fathers in their life at all. Both young men grew up in Baltimore, but their paths diverged at a certain point. Something that is pretty meaningful is their fathers were not in their lives for two very, very different reasons. The Westmore author's father was an acclaimed journalist, a young man who died unexpectedly just due to a sudden health condition. But he was college educated, and his mom was college educated, and he was a very peaceful man. But really, he had a positive impact. The Westmore author only really had two memories of his dad, but he knew of his dad in a positive way. Whereas the second Westmore live, but was not in his life because he chose not to be in his life. His father was an alcoholic and drug addict, did not stay gainfully employed, and pretty much lived with his own mother and didn't have any part in his child's life. And in fact, the first time the second Westmore met his dad was when he was 8 years old, and at the age of 8, met his dad going to his grandmother's house. His dad was asleep after having too much to drink on the couch, woke up, and his first words to his son were, "Who are you?" So that really was profoundly meaningful in the lives of the young men, because in that first chapter, the author Westmore actually asks the second Westmore, "How do you feel about your father?" Or do you think about him? And he says, "I really haven't thought too deeply about his impact on my life because really he didn't have one." And whereas the second Westmore, or the author Westmore, is asked by the Westmore who is in prison, "Do you miss him?" And he says, "Every day, all the time." So it's really, really a critical difference, but it is also a piece where the author Westmore found his path, found his direction, and ended up having a positive influences in his life, and ended up really being a very successful person. Really, I think it's just an outstanding book. It's told in a alternating narrative of the Westmore author and the Westmore who is a convicted felon. And really, it's very meaningful for us as educators, because particularly the second Westmore, but really both Westmores, but the second Westmore, who did not have a dad in his life, represents many economically disadvantaged and oftentimes African American young men that we see in Metro Atlanta who don't have fathers in their lives. And we, as educators, as teachers, assistant principals, guidance counselors, principals, we have to stand in the gap to help fill that void and help keep those young men on the path to success.
Totally agree, Tim. I think that's excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. I think that was something that we all talked about. How it was, talking about like the connections that we made between what our students experience today versus what Westmoor and the other Westmoor experienced. For me, I looked. The book is actually divided into three parts, and so that second part is, to me, kind of an interesting transition. And that second part is actually entitled Choices and Second Chances. And probably one of the most meaningful quotes or sections from that part comes at the very beginning, where Westmoor is visiting the other Westmoor. And they're kind of talking about their lives and about kind of when they were kids. And really, it basically, so the other Westmoor, the one that's in prison, basically says, from everything you told me, both of us did some pretty wrong stuff when we were younger, and both of us had second chances. But if the situation or the context where you make these decisions don't change, then second chances don't mean too much, huh? And so then the Westmoor, the author, kind of sits and is pondering on that, and he just kind of really internalizes it, and he responds, I guess it's hard sometimes to distinguish between second chances and last chances. And I thought, that particular part of the book actually kind of, as the reader moves through it, really shows how this happens, where they both get into some trouble with the law, and this is where their paths really diverge, and they both get second chances. But for the author Westmoor, when he gets his second chance, he actually, the context actually changes. His parent, or his mother, and her family actually, pool money to go to a military school, where the other Westmoor, the one that now is in prison, he had the second chance, but he really didn't, because his context didn't change. He still stayed where he was the whole time, and then eventually, ends up in prison.
Yep, and kind of this is Kibby, to kind of go along with that. It then segues into part three, and part three of the book really talks about those decisions that Krista was referring to, and how the paths that are taken kind of lead to whatever the expectations are that may or may not be fulfilled. And so for me, the part where I felt like that took a turn, and the quote I like, is when he's applying to go to graduate school, and he's trying to get back to Baltimore, which of course is where he came from. And he is trying to get into college, but he knows that, he doesn't quite have the SATs he needs, but he doesn't quite have the grades, but you know what, he's made it. And he's made it because there have been people that believe in him. And so kind of back to that idea that he wasn't taking the right paths. And there was very touch and go there, because it really could have been, like he says, it could have been him instead of the other Wes that was sitting in jail, had things gone in another direction. So he says that while he is reading the acceptance letter when he gets in to graduate school, and he says he starts thinking about Paul White, and Paul White was the admissions counselor. Guys, where was he going back to in Baltimore?
He was going to Johns Hopkins.
Thank you. Yes, getting into Hopkins, which of course, is a very difficult, prestigious school. And he started thinking about the guy that kind of helped him, and he said, having an advocate on the inside, someone who had gotten to know me and understood my story on a personal level, had obviously helped. He goes, it made me think deeply about the way privilege and preference work in the world, and how many kids who didn't have luck, he puts that in quotes, like mine in this instance, would find themselves forever outside the ring of power and prestige. So many opportunities in this country are apportioned in this arbitrary and miserly way, distributed to those who already have the benefit of a privileged legacy. And so I think, that kind of brought it full circle, I think, for all three of us during our different chats, because of course we've been so focused on this notion of privilege and how that affects opportunity. in schools. And
Right.
so I think for us, that was just very important that this book, it's a great one. It's a good one. I want to use it. I want to take it back and use it with my team at probably back at school, because this is a very, very good insight into what can really happen with and without privilege.
Right, and I think that is really critical. We talked when we whether it was the first or the second time, I can't remember, in the coffee shop, in regard to even though these two young men had very parallel lives to some degree, that they grew up in the same place. One of the differences that we did see is the adult figures that stood in the gap for the Westmore author. Two college-educated parents, even though his dad passed, there was that legacy. His grandparents, role models, some positive role models, because his family really valued education and eventually sent him to private schools and military schools, whereas his mom tried, but kind of a heartbreaking moment, couldn't get the Pell Grant and ended up dropping out of college, so he didn't have any college-educated role models. Could have really used some educators to step up.
I agree.
Yep.
How are we doing on time, Krista? Have we gone beyond our time here for our book talk?
Yeah, 11 minutes and 28 seconds.
Oh my goodness. Well, there's just so many good things to say about this book. We encourage everyone to read it.
Amen.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Critical Friends.
Bye.